What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of That Science and Nature Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Howard, and joining me this week, we have Sebastian Forward.
Hello, everyone.
And Becky Hansis O'Neill.
Hey, yo.
So a little bit of a smaller crew. We're barreling towards the end of the semester, and everyone's dropping like flies.
It happens.
Next week, it'll be just me running the show by myself.
Don't say that.
Yeah.
No.
We got a great show for you today. Regardless, we're going to talk about explosive debris. We're going to talk about organisms floating on Pacific garbage. We're going to talk about nature highways. And our topic of the show, we're going to talk about all about how to communicate with your family and loved ones about environmental issues, and maybe even non-loved ones and strangers about environmental issues as well. All right, but to kick us off, we have our first article coming from Futurism. This is all about debris and debris raining down. So the title of this is Debris Rains Down on Protected Wildlife After Starship Explosion. So in the news, you probably heard about Elon Musk. And Elon Musk owns an operation called SpaceX, which is basically his endeavor to explore outer space and planets, all the stuff that NASA does. But because Elon Musk is very rich, he has the money and power to do this. So they recently just launched a rocket, and that rocket unfortunately failed. It blew up in the middle of the air. And unfortunately, when things blow up and they go up in the air, they must come back down. In this case, they come back down as fiery debris all over the wildlife and forest in the nearby area. So I don't exactly understand where this is located. It's somewhere in Texas.
Yeah, around Boca Chica, I believe, is where the... this is one of the main, I don't know, spaceports, I think it is. At least I think a lot of stuff happens around here. So this is one of the big areas where rockets are lifting off, and presumably, you have to choose a place to have a spaceport carefully. Mainly, you have to make it close to wherever you build the rockets, because it's not like you can take a several 100-foot long thing. 100,000? Yeah, they're hundreds of feet long. Yeah, they're just trying to make sure I get the scale right here.
There's a couple orders of magnitude.
Yeah. You also have to make it very close to the ocean, because you want it to fall into the ocean if something goes wrong and not fall into a city.
So you jogged a memory. Obviously, they're not doing active tests with giant rockets, but there's a spaceport in the middle of New Mexico, Virgin Mobile.
Yeah,
I think is.
I believe that's the failed spaceport in the middle of New Mexico, because I think that company is no more.
Oh. Yeah. Sebastian and I both moved to St. Louis from Albuquerque, so if you hear random New Mexico talk, that's why.
Yes.
Or Breaking Bad and or Better Call Saul references.
Fair enough. Also, the similarity of the open ocean with New Mexico is that nobody really cares if a rocket crashes into most of New Mexico. So,
one thing with this article, and I've read a couple other just news pieces about this explosion, and no one seems to actually have a really great description of what the debris is, whether it's like pieces of the rocket that are falling, or I've also seen like dust that was kicked up from the rocket itself was landing on everything. So it's unclear to me what is falling where.
Yeah, if we're talking in legal terms, the harm has not been clearly demonstrated in this article. I feel like I'm sure there is a point of, there's always going to be an impact of absolutely massive rockets blasting off, in the general proximity of wildlife, but I was not very convinced by the evidence presented in this article. I'll say that.
Well, the article says they are, quote, particulates raining down in areas.
Yeah. So,
take that with what you will.
Giant dust storm, I'm guessing.
I mean, if you have something just that loud, and even if it is just kicking up dust for the most part, and the rest of the debris is ending up in the ocean, or it's incendiary and it burns up. I mean, man, I can't talk today. That's still going to have effects on whatever creatures are living on the shoreline or any estuaries nearby, just the sheer noise of something like that. So we have to balance progress with, multi-use land,
I feel like this is a circumstance where somebody needs to find out what this is doing and then publish an article of like, what is the impact of these rockets on like the shorebirds in the area and stuff like that. I feel like this is something that somebody probably already has to do. Like, I feel like there's probably already an environmental assessment related to all of this that has probably been done and like published for the permitting to do giant rocket things.
I think you're right, because it seems like a lot of private consulting firms, that's all they do is like environmental impact statements for contracts like this.
I'm sure there are people whose entire job it is to file reports of like the environmental impact of the rockets and stuff on the nearby things. So I feel like you just need more data to actually say, is this a problem? I'm not sure that there's honestly, even if they did find that they were just like annihilating seabirds in the area, I'm also guessing they probably wouldn't do anything about that.
That, I think, would trigger lawsuits from special interest groups and local groups right away, because it would probably be a violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty, or Bird Act, whatever that legislation's called.
Yeah.
That'd be some pretty good grounds, I think.
That's true. They might be able to get some money for conservation efforts elsewhere.
Yeah, that is one method when you have something like this that arguably needs to be done, space exploration. I guess we could debate that. Do you offset damage somewhere else? Like, if you know this is the area that's impacted, is there an area that's equivalent or almost equivalent that we can protect that's somewhere else?
From what I've seen, that seems to be about as good as it gets for conservation measures. Is, you know, somebody using several $1 billion is going to do something to an area, and that's probably not going to change. You're probably not going to be able to change that interest in the area, but you can make them conserve somewhere else as a stipulation of the contract, allowing them to wreck one area and you know,
or do reclamation work, fix up an area that kind of has been beaten up.
We would all like to hope that the conservation would be the first priority, but unfortunately, that is not how it works in most cases, in my experience.
Well, it does seem like there are measures, at least there are measures being attempted in place. The article talks about the Federal Aviation Administration concluded its environmental assessment of SpaceX Starship program last year, culminating in an 83-page document which lists more than 75 mitigation measures SpaceX has to comply with. However, these measures include a variety of requested changes from limiting noise levels to hiring biologists to find ways to minimize the impacts on local wildlife. It is still unclear, however, how or whether these mitigation efforts have helped protect the local wildlife since then. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like they're trying, but no one really knows if it's actually doing anything or not.
I feel like, honestly, one of the better effects of this would just be the fact that they're using reusable rockets and the fact that there will not be...
Except that one.
Yeah. So,
I was going to say, when the rocket blows up, they can reuse it.
Once they figure it out, presumably there will not be exploding rockets all over the place. So I would wager a guess that the exploding rocket phase of the SpaceX trajectory is, judging on their past trajectory, the main problem will almost certainly be giant dust clouds from liftoff of rockets, which I'm not sure that there's anything anyone can do about that, because it's the size of a building.
Yeah, you'd have to have a whole different propulsion system, something out of Star Trek or Star Wars.
Yeah, no, like the size of these liftoff pads that they use is like absolutely massive. These things are like an acre, maybe? I don't know. It's hard to even gauge the size of them, but the concrete pads that they use are absolutely massive, and the amount of thrust required for this is enough to... You can see the plumes of gas and, vapor ejected from it. It's gigantic. So.
We need a space dock orbiting Earth where we just build them up there, and we don't shoot them through the atmosphere.
Yeah. That's the space elevator concept. Unfortunately, that is a lot farther off than any other space related aspirations we may have. that's a conversation for a different day.
Yes, because we can talk about where the space race will get in our lifetimes on a different episode. According to Cowboy Bebop, which I binge watched this weekend, it'll be 2071. So,
Yes.
Okay. Our next article is all about garbage. And in this case, we're talking about ocean garbage. So this comes to us from NPR. And this is, quote, or the title of this is, quote, "This floating ocean garbage is home to a surprising amount of life from the coast." So the article basically talks about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a giant patch of garbage
Yes.
floating in the Pacific, as the name implies. And the article basically talks about these researchers who are looking at the ecological effects on this, are finding a bunch of marine invertebrates, things like anemones and crustaceans, in these garbage patches, basically growing on them and finding life, which... My first thought was, oh God, I hope this doesn't like perpetuate throwing garbage in the ocean. Like, look, something good came about this.
Well, we'll call it a silver lining on
Okay.
the fact that there's a giant, like, millions of tons of trash in the ocean. I'd say it's the good old Jurassic Park phrase that is the semi-official theme of biology, which I don't know how to feel about
Do
the
you
fact
even-
that
do you
it's
even know what the quote is?
yeah, it's life finds a way.
Okay, I thought you were about to say what's the longer one? We shouldn't have, or I'm botching this already. We spent so long figuring out how to do it. We didn't stop and think if we should do it. I'm botching it horribly.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about.
But yeah, life finds a way, and I will never be surprised at something that has found that life can find a way, because that's what it's best at.
Yeah, I think the biodiversity, so the number of different kinds of things they found, was interesting to me, because I wouldn't be surprised, like, if we move to terrestrial, so we come on land and we go to dumps, what creatures benefit from that? Seagulls, raccoons, dogs. So we see these increases in certain populations of animals that are just really good at rifling through garbage, and this just could be the Finding Nemo version, the ocean version. But the biodiversity kind of threw me a little bit, that they found a lot of different things on the garbage.
And in particular, coastal species. They like the highlight of what they found are things that you almost only find, or like you only find growing on rocks or stuff around land. And because we have stuff that's floating around in the middle of the ocean, all these coastal things are in the middle of the Atlantic, where there's, probably not a rock to be found for thousands of miles. And
Yeah. I mean, I do have some rain clouds, some shade to throw on this, and that is, we don't know how healthy these animals are. We just counted
yeah,
how
that's
many
true.
there were and what kind. So are these animals healthy? Also, if these bits of garbage are covered with delicious mussels and barnacles and things, are they more likely to be ingested from larger animals that are higher up on the food chain, where we know eating garbage is a pretty big cause of mortality? So it's a puzzling find. It's like neither really good nor really bad.
I wonder if over time the buildup of the organisms will actually just like coat the stuff and cause it to sink out of the column. If eventually, if that might be a mechanism of removing all this plastic from the ocean, is just that stuff grows on it eventually, and then it sinks out of the water column and goes into the sediment.
So the Great Ocean Garbage Patch, I'm botching the name on that again already, that exists because the currents are all just like swirling in one area.
Yep. So all the plastic pollution from basically everywhere around the Atlantic Ocean. No, Pacific. Yeah, I don't know why I said Atlantic. Yeah, no, it's called the Great Pacific Ocean, the garbage patch. And yeah, basically everywhere around the Pacific ends up collecting in this big swirling area. It's like thousands of miles wide, and it's not like a giant pile of garbage like people think. It's just kind of like there's chunks of plastic like scattered here and about over a massive area. So in total, there's millions of pounds of things scattered around, but there's only stuff here and there when you're actually like floating through it.
Have you visited?
I have not.
Okay, just
Yeah,
the way you
no.
describe it, you could almost think you
No,
were there.
no.
It's like that computer game Raft, where it's a survival game. You have to build up your technology on your raft, and as you float in the current, you have to snag garbage, and that's how you get the supplies to make your stuff.
That sounds fun and reminds me of the classic movie Waterworld, which I enjoyed way too much for it being one of the yeah.
I like Waterworld too. I don't care what anybody says.
Yes, no. It makes me want to be on a boat, which as a New Mexican is a very strange concept. Like my relationship to boats is very weird.
So do you think this is something that, I mean, Becky talked about the aspect of larger animals or fish eating these pieces of garbage for food and then suffering the ill effects. Do you think this is something that we should be trying to stop in terms of just mitigating the Great Ocean Garbage Patch? I don't actually know what the plan is to deal with it. Is it just sort of like it exists and that's that and don't add to it?
I believe the cat is out of the bag as far as this problem goes. There's some like ambitious tech bro startups that I believe exist that have kooky ideas of removing the plastic from the Great Garbage Patch, but it's not going to happen. No, nothing. It's going to be there until natural processes break it all down over
So, like,
hundreds of years.
later.
Yeah. So
Thousands.
thousands of years probably, unless nature has a way of dealing with
Unless
it,
these
which-
mussels
unless they
digest plastic.
Don't discount the tech bro startups. What if they come up with an ingenious idea that I want to get on board with?
The problem is that it's like collecting particles of dust out of the air over like the entire continental United States. It's like these there's no economic motive to get tiny scraps of random degraded plastic like to collect them. You can just there's nothing useful that you can get out of that besides doing something good for the environment. So doesn't look too good economically.
Okay, well, that's kind of depressing.
Well, yeah. Hey, but we know from this article that there's the silver lining is things are living off of it. So it
This
is.
Jurassic Park.
It has created a new habitat out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which is interesting.
Well, and there are planned projects where they use either old sunken ships or they build sort of the skeleton of a reef out of concrete and then try to like breed corals and things on there. So there's a pretty solid history, I'd say, of people doing projects in an intentional way like this, using man-made structures for conservation.
This
This is just weird.
Yeah, no, and it will be interesting to see. I don't know this habitat is going to expand over time because plastic pollution is still a problem. But I guess we will see what becomes of it.
I feel like this is the start of like a monster movie where like Godzilla came from a nuclear reactor, and it's like what came out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, like some sort of a life form
like-
congealed and then rose up.
Voltron, but covered in barnacles and mussels.
Sure, there's an idea for a movie. Okay,
That's Captain Planet. Okay, sorry. My brain has run away with this idea.
okay. All right. Our last article is less depressing, and that is all about this group in, I think you say, Gloucester.
Yeah, I actually.
Oh.
I'm
not
sure.
British, so I'm sure
Yeah,
if we have
no,
any
yeah.
UK listeners, for our St. Louis radio station
Yeah.
there.
Don't know if it's Gloucester or Gloucester.
All right.
Gloucester. There's a magical
Gloucester.
CH sound, maybe.
Then, yeah, it could be.
All right, but they're a community in Gloucester in the UK, and they basically came together as a community in their area, which is really barren and kind of a urban wasteland, and they created what they're referring to as a nature highway to help encourage wildlife. So the premise here is the community basically did lots of garden plantings and sprucing up the area and adding a lot of street art, not only to make the area prettier for its denizens as an aesthetic and sort of mental health thing, but also it helps different wildlife flourish the area because barren urban wastelands are generally not very supportive of wildlife. So
This kind of brings up the concept of habitat corridors, and this is really important because when you take a big habitat and a bunch of different animals, and then you cut a bunch of roads through it and you break it up into a whole bunch of little pieces, it keeps the animals from interacting with each other and from keeps genes from spreading from one side to the other, and you basically just split them up into a whole bunch of little populations.
And why would you want genes spreading from one side to the other, Sebastian?
That would be genetic diversity.
Okay.
If you have a problem that requires something special, some new adaptation, and only an animal on one side has it, but the other ones aren't able to get it because it can't spread, then yeah, it's a very severe problem with habitat fragmentation and stuff like that. And habitat corridors are kind of the way people try and solve that problem.
And I would add 2 other problems with lack of genetic diversity. One of those is going to be disease resistance, because the more similar animals are to one another, bug comes in. Think of COVID. Some people got very mild or almost no symptoms versus people that got really, really sick. The more uniform genetically your group of animals is, the more likely they are to be susceptible to a single disease. And then the second one would be another thing called inbreeding depression. So that's when a group of animals or plants, any organism, becomes so inbred, so genetically similar, that you start seeing genetic disorders and diseases pop up, and they're actually having less offspring, less babies, and the population starts shrinking. So I would add those 2 as problems with habitat fragmentation as well.
Mm-hmm. And people try and do the habitat corridors all over the place, and this is special because it's kind of habitat corridors in a city, which is somewhat different. Normally, habitat corridors are connecting little national parks or little bits of green space, kind of separated differently. This is creating green spaces in the city, so that wildlife can kind of move between it.
So what do y'all think of the pictures they have here? These are all planter beds, so they're like raised beds. So that might be helpful for a pollinator or a bee that can fly and move from place to place. But what about your little things like hedgehogs?
Mm-hmm.
Is this really helpful for certain species and not others? What do y'all think?
This is actually, I think it's almost a bit of a misnomer, at least from my understanding of like spatial ecology and wildlife conservation. So what it sounds like they're describing in the title is a wildlife bridge, which is to help animals from side A of an obstacle cross over to side B. So like if you Google wildlife bridge, because I did this before the show, you'll see like these giant land bridges stretching over highways, which are supposed to help a lot of like, mammals like deer or small rodents or that kind of stuff move from point A to point B. And it does 2 things. One, it helps keep those 2 habitat areas connected, which promotes genetic diversity, which bestows all the benefits that Becky and Sebastian talked about, but also prevents things like roadkill and hitting your car.
Yeah.
So it has a practical benefit for people also.
Because like road accidents with wildlife are like a huge cause of death and like financial damage in pretty everywhere that has wildlife has problems with that.
So did they make any bridges? Or
Well, that's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like they made any sort of like highways or bridges, what I think of them as, what I just described. Nature highway kind of sounds like a flowery term for like green space that we made in the city. I don't know if that's true or not, but the article is pretty short, so it doesn't really describe like in depth what they made or did.
See, it seems like they had a green space project and included the wildlife. I would say wildlife probably benefits from this, just because anywhere you have more plants, you have more things that animals eat, and then more animals. And, I say green spaces are always good, but I wouldn't say that this is for the wildlife. It's for the community, and they will probably get animals as a result.
I mean, I think the murals of like the hedgehog and the like ferret. I think it's a ferret in the mural are cool.
I believe that is a stoat.
A stoat. Okay, it's not a stout.
No.
Okay. Pronouncing
That
it wrong
is the
this whole
beer.
time.
The stoat is the animal.
Is it spelled the same?
Oh, that's a good question. Stoat would be S-T-O-A-T?
Yeah.
No,
And
they're not spelled the same.
Okay. Keeping you on your toes.
Stout wouldn't. I'm dyslexic and a terrible speller, but stout isn't that S-T-O-U-T?
I think so.
The fact that you don't know makes you a little concerned that I might be right. All right, let's Google it. Stoat versus
They are
stout.
stoats, not stouts.
Yes.
But if we ever...
Not generally at risk of confusing them in common.
Well, if we ever start a microbrewery somewhere, we can have the stoat stout.
Yes. I I would drink the Stoat Stout.
They are related to ferrets. They're all like in the weasel family.
Yes.
Okay, you are correct. Stoat has an A, Stout has an O-U-T.
Okay.
They are separate, so
What do I win?
my
Can I have a
respect.
stout?
Okay, I feel like there's a point I was getting to. Yeah, okay, so the point I was getting to is I'm just imagining the wildlife seeing themselves on the artwork mirror. I'm like, I'm represented, thank you, and then crossing over.
I do vaguely remember reading something where the way British gardens and fences work, that there are a lot of barriers for hedgehogs in particular for genetic diversity. And I think way back in my undergrad days, I read something about snails and roads ruining snail genetic diversity because the snails can't effectively cross the roads in the summer. But that was in the U.S. So I do think providing more ways for animals to get from yard to yard and across roads, I think that all sounds good. And even if these planters are mostly benefiting bees and people, I mean, that's still a step in the right direction.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with just having more plants in a place, in my very biased botanist opinion. I will say that.
And in turn, plants bring animals, so
Yeah.
it's kind of a win-win.
Animals are all right.
All right. Any final thoughts on Gloucester or Stoat or Stout or any of that stuff? The important things we talked about.
I don't know. I feel lucky to be in a place that has like as much green space. Like even in the places that are pretty urbanized in St. Louis, like there's still a lot of trees. Wherever you have trees, you have habitat of some kind. So it's nice.
All right, well, we will be right back after this short break. All right, and we're back. So, topic of the show this week. Last week, we talked all about Earth Day and what that means going forward in the holiday itself. This week, our topic is going to be inspired by Earth Day, which is an article published by BBC News last week. And this is from Earth Day. It's called Earth Day, How to Talk to Your Parents About Climate Change. So, this little short piece basically talks about a bunch of young people, so kids roughly 21 and under, talking to their parents about larger environmental issues, whether it be things like flying less or driving less to produce less carbon emissions that affect climate change, to switching to a veganism lifestyle change in terms of diet, those kinds of issues. And what the article talks about is how these young people are going about these conversations to address these issues to their older generations, which may or may not be receptive depending on their walk of life, where they're from, all that stuff. So I thought it was kind of an interesting piece inspired by Earth Day, because Earth Day is all about celebrating the Earth and how much we love it and how much we want to conserve it. But one of the things that we have to do, that Earth Day promotes, is this sort of sense of activism. So promoting the ideals to keep Earth around. Well, ideals is probably not the right word. Promoting the action to keep Earth around. And I think this starts a good conversation of how do we talk to people about environmental issues, because much like any issue in general, it's usually not fun and can be somewhat laborious and painstaking depending on who your target recipient is. So I guess we'll just start with a general question. Do you guys talk to your family about environmental issue stuff?
It has to be the right subject and the right time, because there's certain things I know that certain family members probably aren't going to listen to, and other things I know they'll be more open to, and that's my in. So it's not about hitting people over the head about how much meat they're eating or when they fly on a plane. It's more like, hey, you like fishing? I like fishing too. Guess what's hurting the fish? That kind of thing.
I completely agree. I feel like nowadays, even all these scientific issues have been kind of like culture warified into oblivion. So, you know, I talk about these climate things with my family members who agree like all the time, but there are absolutely members of my family, especially the older generations, that I couldn't really talk to about climate change just directly. And you know, it's kind of a tragedy, and I wish it wasn't that way, but I agree. A lot of these things you have to hit kind of from a really roundabout thing. Yeah, finding something with a common interest that people haven't heard of as a like big topic issue, because I personally don't want to have to try and fight someone about something like that. And as soon as you turn something into an argument, you've lost, because
Yeah, there's this idea that if you engage in this, I don't know,
debate
Socratean
style, yeah.
kind of Greek debate, that people are going to change their minds. And that just, in my experience, hasn't been the case. Either it needs to come from an authority that they already trust, not one they distrust, or something that wasn't that controversial for them to begin with, and something they're open to. So some of the people that are in most need of educating are also the most overconfident about what they know, when in reality they don't know much at all in terms of ecology or science or what have you.
That would be in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect of, there's a point where even when you know very little about something, you can be very confident, and you can be more confident than someone who knows a lot about it. And it happens very often with issues of science and research-related things. So.
It is the age-old paradox that the more you know, the less you know. Which
Yes.
sounds like something you would read in a fortune cookie.
Yes. Yes.
I feel like we're being kind of cynical, and the article was definitely not cynical.
Yeah. No.
But the people they were talking about are yet much younger, I think.
Yeah. No, I feel like if you talk to someone who's significantly younger, their parents are not like that old.
And
then,
I mean, they would be, Gen Z, and their parents would be Gen X, in theory?
Yeah.
Roughly?
Yeah. I feel like...
Or millennial. Yes, we're
I guess-
getting that old.
I mean, like, the very beginning of millennial. I don't think it's quite there. But yeah, you are right. There could be some millennial parents, too.
Yeah. It's like, I do know... I think I know a few people whose parents, like, are not on board with climate change issues and stuff like that. But, I think a lot more people have grandparents and older that don't believe in it, or agree with the established science. So I feel like it's a problem for a slightly different generation than I think they were talking to here. But I mean, I guess once again, parents or just your family in general, it's all the same general concept of...
I mean, that raises a good question. Do you think there's a cap on the age that you can reach with these sorts of things? I mean, not to sound like ageist, but...
I mean, once again, there will certainly be a time where the things we think are very progressive and very ahead on the time will be totally wrong. And I think it's good to at least be aware of that there will come a day when...
I don't think there's an age limit, but I could see the older I get being a little more stuck in my ways and surly. So I'm not sure what I can do to prevent that in myself.
Yeah, I have read that generally younger people are more malleable to, like, introduce to new ways of thought or ideologies or opinions and that kind of stuff. And then the older you get, the more that becomes more rigid. Even if it's right or wrong, it just becomes more rigid.
I do think there's a sweet spot in terms of informal education, that if you get kids that in the United States are, I would say, between 5th and 7th grade, and they go home and they do a recycling project, and they nag everybody at home, and they're not quite obnoxious teenagers yet, but they're getting there. So it's not like this, mom and dad eat meat, so I'm going to be vegan. They don't believe in climate change, I'm going to take that up. So before you get to that rebellious behavior, but where the kids are still old enough to understand rather complex things about what you're telling them, that for me is kind of the sweet spot of reaching older people with the younger generation.
I agree with that being kind of the time to have these conversations is when children are young. That is the time to teach them about these things. And I don't know. I don't see much success in the success rate is dramatically lower when you're talking to your grandparents than if you're talking to, like, your little cousins, as far as teaching them about the importance of, these issues that they haven't been told about for years already in a, like, contravening perspective. It's like, you can lay out a very nice argument, but if someone's been hearing for the past 20 years the opposite perspective, it's going to be a lot harder to convince them otherwise.
One thing the article mentions, it gives a couple accountants of children who are talking about some issue that's important to them, like veganism or traveling less or something along those lines. And they kind of interviewed some of the parents, some of the kids, and basically they were sort of like, there's a little bit of well, my child may be too young to understand this issue, or maybe this is just like, not to say like the classic, it's just a phase, but there's a little bit of the undertone of like, well, they're not old enough to understand the complexities of this, or maybe they don't entirely understand. Like, I am parent, I know best, is somewhat of I got from that vibe. I don't know where the question I want to ask is going with this. What do you think about that?
I know the point of what you're making, and I think it brings the whole concept of parents learning from their children, which I think is always somewhat of a difficult
That's
concept.
blasphemy,
Yes,
Sebastian.
it is a difficult concept for parents to accept that is possible, to learn from your children or your grandchildren, and I think. I don't know. Do you guys think that there is an element of just annoying your family until they finally give in? And
I think you can do that when you are in 4th or 5th grade.
Yes,
I think
yes.
when you are 16, it just looks like you're in some kind of rebellious phase.
What about when you're 25?
Are you still in your
some of us
rebellious phase at
never-
25?
I mean, I think what I see with teenagers or very young adults that I am just kind of like, okay, is they tend to suffer from really black and white thinking. And even looking at the quotes in the article, I could see that. And it's not that they're wrong. Yeah, people on average should eat less meat. That is globally going to have a huge impact. Maybe if we do travel less or push airlines for more green fuels, things like that, those are important. But I notice when young people are really intense in black and white thinking and they're just learning about these things, sometimes they do draw a line in the sand where they're not actually achieving their goal with their family.
Yeah, I agree. The thing for me is, like, you're not going to convince most people to be vegan, but you will do a massive benefit for the environment by just getting people to eat chicken instead of beef. Like, that is, you are doing a huge environmental service by just picking chicken instead of beef, or even like pork instead of beef. And you don't have to convince people to change their way of life to just eat more chicken instead.
That's what Chick-fil-A wants.
And I don't, maybe someone in the article did this and I'm just not remembering, but if you say wanted your family to embrace veganism, I imagine a lot of teenagers might enjoy going, I am not eating the hamburgers today, Mom. Not happening. Do you know what those cows went through? How bad factory farming is? And all those things might be true, but this person would have a lot more headway with their parent if they said, I would like to cook you one vegan dinner a week. Would you support me in that? Can we go grocery shopping together? And that is not what teenagers tend to do.
Yes. That is, we are not set up in a way to resolve arguments by, like, carefully convincing people over long periods of time. It's not what we're wired to do. We're kind of wired for like instructing people on things and like trying to win arguments, and it's incredibly difficult and almost impossible sometimes if the other person is just as convinced of what they believe as you are.
So the girl in the article that wanted to transition her family to veganism started when she was 13. So maybe not quite the rebellious 16-year-old that Becky alluded to, but we're starting to get there where we're kind of at the cusp of that, I could see.
Yeah. Like, it's just something of, kind of taking an extreme viewpoint that's dramatically harder to be successful with than just doing something more moderate. Like finding some decent goal to try and convince people of is so much easier than trying to get people to totally reshape their life. And I think it's much more reasonable to start with that, because once again, if somebody's like, no, I'm absolutely not going to, totally change my life and become vegan, you might be able to convince them to have steak less often. Like, people reject extreme suggestions a lot more often than they do, smaller, like incremental changes.
Yeah. Yeah, the article talks about that a couple of times where instead of just being like, hey, mom and dad, climate change is bad, you start with like, hey, let's have one vegetarian dish a week. And that's a small incremental stepping stone. And then maybe you can up it from there. Depending on, I guess, your goals and what you want to achieve as the child, you could ratchet up as much as you could, in theory, get away with to the point where your parents don't push back. Yeah. But I imagine that line will be crossed at some point.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing, and I think it's just kind of what people have to do with every issue that's now controversial, that has become controversial over the past 1 to 2 decades. Is convincing people who believe otherwise, or learning how to deal with people who you can never convince of that fact, which we all have to do.
So the article does talk about a larger campaign that some of the kids who tried to convince their parents of various things, and that article is called Teach the Parent, and I actually went to the link, and I was just curious what this was. And Teach the Parent is basically this action movement where young people are trying to act as educators to provide climate education to their parents and guardians through a way of informal conversation to inspire some sort of action to small steps. So interesting what we were talking about with the child teaching the parent. There actually is a movement of sorts to do this. So that's cool. Would either of you have tried this when you were younger if you had wanted to?
No.
If I needed to, I didn't have to worry about that with my parents. But I would have probably been one of those obnoxious teenagers. Yeah.
I think my mom would have let me do my own thing. Like, she wouldn't have made me eat meat or anything, but I don't think it would have changed her behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have been socially adept enough to do that. I would have been like, I was very shy and socially awkward until probably past college. So, I'm still socially awkward, but I'm much more confident about it and extroverted than I used to be. So it wouldn't have worked out so well as 12-year-old me. Anyway.
Yeah, looking at the kid that did vegetarian food, I got the impression from quotes from her moms that they were already a little open-minded to learning from their daughter. And I think of the people in my life that I would want to talk to, and just getting to the point of them accepting that maybe human behavior could have an effect on climate change. I feel like I would always hit that same wall before initiating any behavior.
The wall being
that they're not acknowledging that climate change has a human cause. They think it's cyclical, natural.
It's the cows.
Yeah.
Or, I think just it's easy to convince people of things that they don't object to being taught. Like, you can, I don't know. It's like why recycling, it's kind of hard, but people don't generally fight recycling, or they're not morally opposed to it. Whereas, with climate change and fossil fuels, there's been a generational campaign of misinformation to convince people that fossil fuels are fine to burn and nothing's going to be bad. And, on behalf of the people that make fossil fuels, they've put in a lot of effort to keep people using them. So it's not like this is a one-sided issue. There is an opposing side that has done quite well in convincing people otherwise.
Though I have noticed there are enough economic incentives that I have a few people in my life that I know that are not on board with the whole human-caused climate change, but they sure like the money that electric cars and solar panels save them. So, yeah, we might be running into that finally.
Yeah, that's something I like to bring up about, it's not really green activism or whatever that has changed our grid. It's the fact that solar and wind are cheaper than coal now. And as a result, no one is making new coal power plants, and we're actually dealing with so many new renewable energy projects that we're having grid problems because we don't know how to manage having this many new green energy projects. And there's that's the thing now.
And electric cars are super fun to drive.
Yes.
The acceleration is so much faster.
Are electric cars actually taking off? Because I feel like the vibe I get in this day and age, maybe it's because the Midwest, is that they're still more of a luxury item.
Yeah, I think they're gonna. I've been watching a little bit because I'm like, come on, Subaru, bring that price down when you're electric. And I think in our lifetimes, they're going to start to become affordable. And what I've noticed is you still have people buying really new gas-powered cars that are just as expensive. I think electric is finally getting in the range where people can just afford that next time they buy a car.
And I know that part of some of the recent initiatives are making it illegal to produce gas cars in is it 2035 or something?
I haven't even heard about this. What is this?
Yeah, no, that's some of the new things I believe in our country, that the manufacturers can't be making gasoline powered cars, or at least not most of their lines within a decade, I believe.
So I guess this applies to California. This is just a quick Google search. California air regulators voted Thursday of last August to approve stringent rules that would ban the sale of new gasoline cars by 2035.
Yeah. Right. So they're
a big market.
Absolutely on their way of, the prices are coming down. I know this is one thing that people assume, or people know, that electric cars are better for the environment, but even if you are running your electric car directly from a coal-fired power plant, you still use half as much emissions.
That makes sense.
Yeah, just because electric cars are insanely efficient. So, even before we have all the renewable grid stuff, electric cars are still great for carbon emissions. So
sure, all the emissions for refining and making and transporting gasoline are pretty substantial.
Absolutely huge.
So, now I have a random electric car question.
Yeah.
So when you go for an emissions test and your car is all electric, do you just not do it? How does this work?
I'm guessing you probably don't have to go in for emissions.
I don't know. Given my experience with St. Louis municipalities and how things are run, you would probably just get stuck in a loop of never being able to register your car if you bought it in another state and had a lien on it still.
Fair. Yeah, once again, the people really like their electric cars, and I knew a guy who's into car racing. And he talked about how some teenager with his parents' Tesla was just dominating the races against $200,000 custom race cars, because electric cars are just innately so much more powerful and faster. So
it is so fun. Go test drive one, Jeremy. Go to a dealership.
Okay.
Don't tell them, and then you just floor it on the freeway
and feel
Yes.
that thrill.
Yes.
I will expect to see a lot more electric cars in the new Fast and Furious movie at the end of next month. So I'll be on the lookout for them and be like, where are they?
Fair.
Okay, so as we wrap up, we mostly talked about speaking to family about environmental issues and causes. What, just on a broader sense, speaking to strangers about environmental issues and causes, is that a no-no, don't bother with it because I don't know this person, or is there a reason to do that at all?
Well, what do we mean? When we're in the line getting popcorn at a movie theater?
I would just say whenever the instance arises, do you feel the need or want to do that?
No.
Why not?
Yeah, no.
I don't like talking to strangers. Unless it's an organized science outreach event, then I'm very happy to talk to whoever wants to talk to me. That's different, but when I'm just out and about, no.
Yeah, I know my dad is the kind of person to explain the mechanics of science to the random person standing in line at the grocery store, but I did not inherit that, and I suppose that's also just kind of a generational thing of not interacting with strangers.
What about
how about you, Jeremy?
I mean, not really, because again, I would want to have some kind of connection with them. I mean, my next question was going to be, what about indirect methods, such as Jeremy gestures to a radio program about science and nature?
Right now, yes.
I like this format people aren't coming in and like arguing
Yeah,
or being
we're in
mean
a
to
locked studio, so no one can bang on the door and get in.
Yeah, I think, if somebody asks about it, I guess we're all the weird outgoing type to freely offer scientific information when it seems like someone might be able to use it. Mm-hmm. But I feel like there are certainly circumstances where it seems like a better idea to do that, and I think, knowing all of us, we are probably at the highest level of offering unsolicited scientific advice, like in public
Possible.
to strangers. Like I know we all just said we don't like talking to strangers, but we're also absolutely nerds, and I'm just gonna speak for all of us and say we probably would if the opportunity arose.
I'd say we're pretty good. How many people, Jeremy, have come up to you and told you all about honeybees?
It happens fairly often.
And my guess is you probably don't start a honeybee bumblebee debate with them.
No, I mean, usually what I have to do, since I research bumblebees, is differentiate, this is a honeybee, this is a bumblebee. But like, honeybees are the ones you see with the beekeepers in the giant white boxes, and bumblebees are the cute fuzzy ones you see on the flower. It's like that level of
And the
distinction.
honeybees are feral, and they are not from here.
See, I don't lead with that, because I don't have the same hate that other people have on honeybees. I mean, I understand they are not as efficient at being pollinators like bumblebees.
Yes.
But this is a whole other debate we could have. But
Yeah.
to get
We
to Becky's...
we should do a bee episode.
We
Pollinator
should
Week
talk
is
about
in
these.
June, so that wouldn't be a bad June episode. Anyway,
Alright.
but to answer Becky's point about speaking to strangers, hello, radio strangers that are listening to this science program. I am talking to you and engaging you through an indirect format.
Are we preaching to the choir here?
We might be. I don't know who listens to this. So,
Fair.
but yeah, all right. So any final thoughts on communicating science and environmental issues to family, loved ones, strangers, the radio?
It's hard.
Do it.
Do it anyway.
Yeah. Do it when you can. Don't be emotionally invested in convincing people of things. Do your best and hope that something good happens.
Apparently, from what we've discussed, the cutoff is Gen X, so that's the highest you can go for age. So don't aim higher, just aim for that.
I wouldn't say that, but go on.
No, but communication is always good. Engaging with your fellow family members, friends, civilians is always a good time. But that's going to wrap up our episode this week. Thank you so much for listening. I'd like to thank Becky. I'd like to thank Sebastian. You've been listening to That Science and Nature Show. My name is Jeremy Howard, and we're out.